The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I was listening to the Ice Age Farmer podcast the other day. And, he's got his finger on the pulse of a lot of what's happening with the food shortages that we were talking about. And he mentioned a policy they have in Europe. I can't recall whether it was Germany or France, but they actually don't allow the farmers to utilize 100% of their farmland. And they pay them a subsidy. So what happens, they say, okay, you've got, let's say, 100 acres. We're only going to allow you to farm 50 of those acres. And it was a significant percentage as well. And then what we'll do is we'll just give you a government subsidy so you can go ahead and make ends meet. And even through what we've been seeing over the past month or two, the governments still haven't pulled back that policy and said, you know what, we're going to have a food shortage here. So why don't we go ahead and for this season, let you guys utilize 100% of your farmland? They still haven't done that yet. So my point there is, just like you're saying, we have to feel the energy pain. At what point do we look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, these policies just don't work no matter how good they make us feel? When are we going to realize that food pain, either in Europe or in the United States, to the point where they say, okay, this policy for climate change, it might make us feel good, but it's going to result in potentially hundreds of millions of people starving right now. We're not talking about death in the future, 50 years from now. We're talking about next month. We're talking about in the next 6 months. And it's just unbelievable to me that they haven't gotten to the point in Europe where they're just allowing these farmers to utilize their land because it's not cool with the people who are against climate change.
Yeah, so this speaks to a broader point of if we're going to be in a war, we need to be in a wartime mindset. And as it pertains to the seriousness of both our energy and our food policies, it feels like, frustratingly, we have more pain to experience before we shock ourselves into the necessary wartime mindset. We put out a piece called Let's Get Serious About Energy a couple of weeks ago, where we laid forth what we think is a very sensible and logical plan for how the president should go forward, given the dislocation from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And you would think at some point, political survival would dictate that you move on from the platitudes, open up a physics textbook and understand what it is that you need to do. When we get serious in this country, which is sort of why long-term I'm still, and the Doomberg team is still pretty optimistic, we can move mountains very quickly like we did in World War II. We went from not involved in the war to the decisive factor in less than 4 years. And the arsenal of democracy is still embedded in the DNA of the American worker. It just needs to be unleashed. The shackles of nonsensical regulatory barriers just need to be lifted. But the president's not there yet. So let's be totally honest. We are totally unserious still. And so ultimately, we've put out a few tweets that seem to get a lot of traction, simply retweeting a headline that says, more pain needed. We just need more pain because clearly we are still in denial as to the magnitude of the crises, not crisis, crises that we see coming down the pipe.
Yeah, I try to kind of use some game theory and put myself in the position of a politician. And there are no certainties, just probabilities. But I think one thing we can say with 99.9% certainty is the politicians are going to do whatever they think they need to do to get reelected. So let's just, although as crazy as it may sound, if I try to put myself in the position of Joe Biden, or let's say the administration, you've got this balancing act because you've got all these people that are going to vote for you that see natural gas, they see fossil fuels, let's see, as the Antichrist. And anything you do, if it's turning on a pipeline or anything like that, results in the world ceasing to exist in 10 years. So you've got that constituency. And then you've got the constituency that's freaking out because, which is the majority of people, because food prices are going up. The problem they have is that the people in the first constituency can't connect the dots, right?
And they're not forced to, because they live a life of excess and privilege that the same people who are worried about the food prices going up have no
but from a psychological standpoint, how do you get that first group to say to understand that yes, okay, climate change may be an issue, but that's in the future, and right now we've got a much bigger issue. And another thing, I had a conversation with our good friend Art Berman the other day, and we were kind of thinking through this, and I'm like, okay, let's just say that climate change is something that's going to negatively impact, or could potentially negatively impact the world in 20, 30, 40 years. That's something that is a, is it a 50% probability? Is it a 25? Is it a 10? We don't know. And what impact will it have? That's another unknown. But what is unknown is that if we make these energy decisions today, hundreds of millions of people will die. So what we're doing is we're rolling the dice and saying, let's just go ahead and kill 100 million people or more today in hopes that, our fears are about the future, these unknowns don't come to fruition. And to me, that makes no sense whatsoever. So psychologically, how do you get those people to understand that this is the cost benefit analysis we have to go through?
Well, if there's anything that the last 2 years have taught us, it's that we as a society, and especially the subset among us that we would call the elite, who lord over us, we as a society and the elite who rule us are utterly incapable of doing cost-benefit analyses.
Yeah, right.
And so to expect that we would be able to have a logical discussion to sort of change that when we've not yet seen the full consequences of what we've been warning about is a bit unrealistic. I think ultimately, like everything, it'll be too late. We will try all the bad things before we try the thing that we should have done, that we must do, when the pain has increased to the level where we realize, okay, something needs to be done. And I would say, sadly, that the death of 100 million people outside of the U.S. is not nearly as important to the political elite as the price of gasoline at the pump. And the price of the gasoline at the pump is far more likely to induce the type of change that we're hoping for than pictures of people starving in far off countries. Distance. There's a distance component to empathy. Yeah, right. If that starving child was in the same restaurant as you George Gammon you would pay for that meal. You would buy that child a meal. You would make sure they were nourished while they were in your proximity. But the proximity effect of ethics is one of the failings of humans. And if most of the damage is done over there, we're unlikely to internalize the true consequences of our own behaviors that might have caused that. And so when we say, more pain ahead, pain overseas is not going to impact this administration. Yeah, right. Pain domestically is what's going to impact this administration. So if we begin to see $6 and $7 and $8 gasoline prices, that's far more likely to trigger the type of political intervention and sanity check that we've been hoping for and writing about and advocating for several months than a mass starvation event in a far off country. And I don't like having to say that. I just think that is the raw political analysis that needs to be said.
There's one thing we can all agree on, and that is the government intervention and how heavily it distorts the economy. And I mean, a great example is that report, that article you just did on the food shortages and how there's all these inputs that we don't even think about. Everything from nitrogen to potassium to potash, all the way to propane, for drying the grains and whatnot. I mean, and you just adjust one thing, a central planner comes in and just does one thing to try to pander to a political base by saying, oh, no, you can only use, let's say, 80% of your farmland or something like that. And it has this ripple effect throughout the entire economy that absolutely no one could predict. But it seems like the central planners and these politicians just layer these bad decisions with unintended consequences on top of each other. So
Yeah.
it's like, what do you think the next well, let's discuss that, because you talked about the administration. I know they're trying this in Quebec. I think that what's his name in California, the used car salesman, Newsom.
Yeah.
He talked about this, and I heard Biden talk about this at a global level for helping out countries in Africa, how we're just basically going to give them money. And it's as if inflation, consumer price inflation, can be solved with more money instead of more supply, right? So what chain reaction, what unintended consequences will result from this other than just price inflation?
Yeah, so concurrent with that, though, I will say that sort of would fall into the category of managing to the optics,
Right.
and so and that's fine, and you understand that sort of is part of the politics game. But I do think it is important to give the Biden team some credit for the deal they struck in Europe on forming a joint task force to explore ways to increase the U.S.'s capacity to export liquefied natural gas to Europe to make up for any potential or future shortfalls that Vladimir Putin might decide to expose the Western Europeans to. And so, and we've been advocating for this for a long time, and we think that ultimately, when the Biden team, came back from Europe and begins to study this issue, they're going to see that there are some pretty simple things they can do to substantially accelerate this, like getting a task force on regulatory acceleration, approving the projects that are already done, reconsidering the Keystone Pipeline fiasco in Canada, and so on and so on. And it wouldn't take much to unleash the full power. To pivot this conversation to a bit of optimism, the U.S. is the most capable in the world of turning the energy on. We have incredible technologies, really great companies, true patriots working at those companies that have long been requesting and lobbying for nothing more than the right and the ability and the protection of the government to produce the critical energy that we need, and to maybe stop alluding to the fact that these people are criminals. I mean, there was at one point, even Biden himself, during the campaign before he was elected, made reference to the fact that criminal charges weren't out of question for fossil fuel executives for the quote unquote damage they've done to the planet.
Yeah. And now the windfall profit tax as well.
The windfall profit taxes. And, it requires some political courage, which unfortunately has been in shockingly short supply. And by the way, both parties are guilty in some ways, not to just sort of be trying to be neutral for the sake of it. But it's time we all got together, we all got serious, and we said, hey, the Mountain Valley Pass pipeline, which is 95% complete, which was approved years and years ago, which suffered another bureaucratic setback this year, and a three-panel judge, of Clinton appointees and Obama appointees revoked their previously issued permit and left that whole project in limbo. Maybe we want to just sort of pass an executive order or get a quick law passed where we just approve that and we get that going, because that limits the amount of natural gas that can be lifted out of Appalachia, which puts constraints on our ability to help our European allies, and also results in higher prices outside of Appalachia. Ironically, it results in lower prices in Appalachia, because if gas can't leave, then kind of have to sell it for what they can get it for. But a task force of industry executives that know what they're doing, that know what they need, they can certainly be unleashed very, very quickly. And so to the end, at the end, when we say more pain needed, we know what the answer will be. The only real question is, how much pain do we truly need to suffer before we convince those who can't yet see what's going on what needs to happen?
Yeah, great point.